If you've ever watched a UFC fight and thought about how people place bets on who wins, how fights end, or even which round a knockout happens in, then this guide is going to walk you through everything in a simple, beginner-friendly way so you understand how betting on UFC fights works using the FanDuel Sportsbook platform. This is not about rushing into anything or making predictions sound guaranteed, because UFC is unpredictable by nature, but rather about understanding the system, the options available, and how people typically navigate the process step by step, so it makes sense from start to finish. When you open FanDuel Sportsbook, the first thing you'll notice is that it is designed like a modern sports betting app or website, where different sports are listed, and UFC usually falls under the MMA or combat sports section. Once you click into UFC, you are greeted with a list of upcoming fights, usually organised by event cards. These cards include the main event, co-main event, and undercard fights. Each fight shows the two fighters' names, and beside their names you will see odds. These odds are the core of how betting works, and understanding them is the first real step before placing anything. Odds basically represent probability and payout potential. In simple terms, a fighter with lower odds is considered the favourite, meaning more people expect them to win. A fighter with higher odds is considered the underdog, meaning fewer people expect them to win, but the payout is bigger if they do. For example, if fighter A has odds of -250 and fighter B has +200, that means fighter A is heavily favoured, while fighter B is the underdog. If you bet on fighter A and win, your profit is smaller because the outcome was more likely. If you bet on fighter B and they win, your profit is higher because it was less expected. Now, when you actually decide to place a bet, you tap on the fighter or market you want. The app then brings up a betting slip. This is where you choose how much money you want to stake. The amount you enter is called your wager. Once you input your stake, the app automatically calculates your potential payout based on the odds. This is important because it shows you in advance what you could win if your prediction is correct. However, it is also important to understand that nothing is guaranteed, especially in UFC, where one punch or submission can completely change the outcome of a fight in seconds. One of the most common ways people bet on UFC fights is called Moneyline betting. This is the simplest form of betting, where you just pick the fighter you think will win the fight, regardless of how they win. It doesn't matter if they win by knockout, submission, or decision. As long as they win, your bet is successful. Beginners usually start here because it is straightforward and doesn't require predicting too many details. As you get more familiar with UFC betting, you start noticing more advanced options. One of these is method of victory betting. This is where you try to predict how the fight will end. For example, you might bet that a fighter wins by knockout or wins by submission. This is harder to predict than simply picking a winner, but it also offers higher payouts because it requires more accuracy. Another popular option is round betting. This involves predicting which round the fight will end in, or whether it will go the full distance. UFC fights are scheduled for a certain number of rounds, depending on whether it is a title fight or not. Most non-title fights are 3 rounds, while main events and title fights are usually 5 rounds. So you might see options like fight ends in round 2, or fight goes to decision. These types of bets are more specific and require understanding fighters' styles, stamina, and tendencies. There are also prop bets, which are special bets that don't necessarily focus on the winner. Instead, they focus on specific events during the fight. For example, whether there will be a knockdown, whether the fight will go the distance, or even whether a fighter will land a certain number of strikes. These bets add more variety and are often used by experienced bettors who like analysing detailed fight statistics. Before placing any bet, most people spend time studying the fighters. This includes looking at their records, recent performances, fighting styles, and even how they match up against each other. In UFC, styles make fights. A striker might struggle against a strong grappler, while a grappler might struggle against someone with elite takedown defense. Understanding these matchups helps you make more informed decisions instead of just guessing based on names or popularity. Another important thing to pay attention to is fight news. Sometimes fighters get injured, miss weight, or change opponents at the last minute. These changes can completely shift the odds and expected outcomes. That's why people who bet regularly stay updated on official UFC announcements and weigh-ins before finalizing any decisions. Once you've chosen your bet and confirmed your stake, the bet is placed and added to your active bet section. From there, you simply watch the fight and wait for the results. If your prediction is correct, your winnings are automatically credited to your account. If not, the stake is lost. This is why responsible decision making is important, because outcomes are uncertain and even strong favourites lose sometimes. One thing beginners often misunderstand is thinking betting is about certainty. In reality, it is about probability and risk. Even a fighter with a strong record can lose unexpectedly due to injuries, strategy changes, or just one moment in the cage. That is what makes UFC exciting, but also unpredictable. Managing your bankroll is another key part of the process. This simply means deciding how much money you are willing to use for betting and not going beyond that limit. Experienced bettors often only risk a small percentage of their total funds on each fight, so they can stay in control even if they lose a few bets in a row. This is important because chasing losses or increasing bets emotionally usually leads to poor decisions. FanDuel also provides live betting, which allows you to place bets while the fight is happening. This is called in-play betting. For example, if a fighter is performing better than expected in the first round, odds may shift in real time, and you can place a bet based on how the fight is unfolding. This adds another layer of excitement, but also requires quick thinking and careful observation. Some people also use betting boosts, or promotions that are occasionally offered by platforms like FanDuel. These can increase potential payouts or reduce risk on certain bets. However, these offers usually come with conditions, so it is important to read the terms carefully before using them. As you continue exploring UFC betting, you start to notice that experienced bettors often combine knowledge with patience. They don't bet on every fight. Instead, they look for matchups where they feel there is clear value or where they understand one fighter's advantage more deeply than the general public opinion reflected in the odds. It is also worth noting that UFC betting should always be approached responsibly. In many regions, including the United States, you must be at least 21 years old to use platforms like FanDuel Sportsbook. Betting is meant to be a form of entertainment, not a way to make guaranteed income. The outcome of fights is influenced by many unpredictable factors, and even experts lose bets regularly. So when you look at the full picture, betting on UFC fights using FanDuel Sportsbook is really about understanding how odds work, choosing the type of bet you want to place, studying fighters and matchups, managing your money carefully, and then accepting the unpredictable nature of combat sports. It is a combination of knowledge, observation, and risk management, rather than luck alone or emotional guessing. Once you understand all these pieces, the process becomes much clearer. You are no longer just clicking on names randomly, but instead making informed decisions based on styles, statistics, and fight context. Whether you are watching a heavyweight knockout artist or a technical submission specialist, every fight becomes more interesting when you understand how betting markets interpret their chances. And in the end, that is what platforms like FanDuel are designed for, giving users a structured way to engage with sports like UFC beyond just watching, turning fights into a more interactive experience where every round, strike, and moment can change how the outcome is viewed in real time.